I didn't like that either, because even though you hear the emotion and you hear her singing a lot better, and her smile and all that, Anne Bisson is 56 years old. That made her sound 45. And I didn't like that. Because she would, if she, yeah, she would probably love it.
Brad, you tell her.
I didn't tell her this. Hey, don't record this. You've got to remember that my purpose of doing this was to get as close to live as possible. You know, I want to bring this band, this trio, into your room, and as unadulterated as possible. And that was basically what I thought. And when we did some back and forth, we were talking about the hardness of the vinyl versus the elasticity. They can, with chemistry, they can change elasticity as well as hardness. And what's more important is basically is the coefficient of restitution of the springiness of the vinyl. When the stylus flies across this ridge that makes this sound, they get deformed, and how they bounce back and how fast they bounce back and hits the stylus changes the sound of it. So they could add a little bit of this, add a little bit of that, and we are still tweaking it, but it will be we are working towards the ultimate vinyl formulation. Like, for example, you remember MoFi had that Quiax formulation, and that Quiax was either wonderful or horrible because there was a lot of variation batch to batch. Yes?
How much would the shape of your needle affect this output from the type of vinyl you're using?
It does, to an extent, and from my own experiments, it is pretty consistent because I've got a turntable with 2 tone arms, spherical stylus, hyper-elliptical stylus, and a line contact, and I can change the tone arms, and you can hear pretty consistently the vinyl working with all three shapes. There is a slight difference on a bigger difference on the clear. There was slight difference on the first one, and on this one I'm going to play you. There was the least of the difference, and for that reason we picked this one, because then more audiophiles will get the same experience, rather than it sounding so very different when you have got different cartridges. So you know all these cartridge reviews. If you don't even know the particular pressing of the album that they are reviewing it on, how do you do an apples to apples comparison? You know, and that's why some of these direct-to-disc albums, my reference albums anyway, I buy 10 copies of them because I'll eventually play them a lot. Yes.
Which stylus shape do you like best?
Unfortunately, I like the one that I use, the Ohura. It's on a cartridge called the Proteus Transfiguration Proteus D. It's a diamond cantilever and an Ohura stylus profile. It gives me the lowest surface noise, and it plays some of my noisy vinyls a bit more quietly. But it's also responsible for shaving my my 1957 acetate that I love so much. You know, because it's so stiff and it's so fine. When I played, I was wondering why there was this cloud of dust flying out. It was basically chewing through my vinyl.
So this is a line contact?
It's a line contact.
Yeah, right, yeah. It has to be perfectly aligned.
It has to be perfectly aligned. It has to be perfectly aligned as well.
Yeah, line contact is the best, but
That's downside.
yeah,
Okay. So
it's the best.
So after
frequency
much back and forth, we came up with this one. Remember, same stamper.
Different noise.
Yeah.
Different noise, even the noise is different.
Now, yeah.
It's got transient response more like the first one.
September in Montreal.
It's got a smile,
Yeah,
second
smile and soft, walking in the evening sunset. My thoughts are floating by in this oh so pink sky. The blessing that we all do share today. 'Cause you're my man. That's where I am now. My mind is cool and calm. Yes, you're my man. My eyes see clear again. Yes, you hold my quiet strength. My happiness is you, and I am smiling for you. December in Montreal, the night is dark and soft. Snow is gently dancing on my face. Just close your eyes a while. Just snowflakes from the sky. Touch and kiss your mouth and smile. 'Cause you're my man. That's where I am now. My mind is cool and calm. Yes, you're my man. My heart is singing clear again. Yes, you are my quiet strength. My happiness is you, and I am smiling for you.
Amazing.
Isn't it fascinating?
That's amazing.
Yeah, just with a different vinyl formulation, it could sound like a different band. It's like a
So how is this black vinyl different from the other black vinyl?
it's a little bit springier. It's a little bit squeakier. It's got a little bit more gloss, so that there's theoretically less friction of the stylus inside the groove, and I think it's slightly harder. You know, so it's basically what I asked them to do, and they do it.
It's amazing how her voice quality changed.
Yeah. Okay.
Is this the formulation then on the production vinyl?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the formulation on the production vinyl. So I brought one of the direct-to-disc lacquers, and I can play this and then the lacquer. But what I want to do now is play the tape of that track.
Now we're talking.
I have the tape too.
September in Montreal, the air is mild and soft, walking in the evening sunset. My thoughts are floating by in this oh so pink sky. The blessing that we all do share today. 'Cause you're my man. That's where I am now. My mind is cool and calm.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yes, you're my man. My eyes see clear again. Yes, you hold my quiet strength. My happiness is you, and I am smiling for you. December in Montreal, the night is
Yeah,
dark
the
and
voice, the
soft.
wavering of the voice.
Snow is gently dancing on my face. Just close your eyes a while. Just snowflakes from the sky. Touch and kiss your mouth and smile. 'Cause you're my man.
Pick your noise. Yeah, because,
Tape rules.
well, tape's good.
So what level?
No. Pick your noise. I think
Sure.
that's
Yeah,
it.
pick your noise, yeah.
Because the interesting thing, when you put the stylus down the vinyl, you hear this background noise. Okay, it's there constantly. The thing about the tape is that there's no noise because it's actually got better dynamic range, but there's a noise burst. It's like a little sideband on every
Note.
note, everything that you hear, particularly piano. You really pick it on piano. And I was just like nostalgia when I hear a tape recorder. I said, yeah, that's the way all LPs used to sound like way back when because you
they
had the
all cut from tape,
noise.
yeah.
Yep, they cut from tape, and that's what you hear is that noise. So you have to pick your noise, but you get used to it. The other thing too is, if you think about it, there's a little bit of scrape flutter, so there's a little bit of flutter in it. All of those things are in there in a tiny bit. Although this is quite nice. This tape machines, whatever Bernie did it on, and this playing back. Very, very well fluttered. nice tape machine. I spent years playing with tape machines.
Yeah, you spend years playing with tape machine, and Bernie spent years playing with tape machine, which is why when we did the comparison in his studio, one of the things that we did on Friday night after the setup was the sound check and everything, and we wanted to make sure everything was working. So Bernie cut a short lacquer and tape and digital, and we listened to all three. And there's a good reason why the lacquer is the direct to disc is the way to go, because you don't get all this tape things that actually sound pleasant to a lot of people, because audiophiles are used to cone driver overhang and bass woofer inertia and all that, and you hear that on tape, and audiophiles actually like it. But when you are in the studio and you listen to this, you hear a totally different experience.
Well, it sounded more live.
Yeah, you can say that.
So,
Yeah.
so how high on the view was that when you're playing back? Is that hitting zero?
No. I think we were doing -6
Okay.
because you are playing live. You
Right.
don't know how hard the musicians are going to whack.
Right.
We are going to hit.
Yeah.
And we ran pretty conservative. The lacquers were also cut very conservative because Bernie gave space for the
That way you don't have to
dynamics.
constantly monitor the,
Instead of
pitch.
Well, he was still there with a microscope
but-
and watching it, but he wanted to make sure that we maximize it, because he said that if the grooves are too wide, it's also very bad for a lot of tone arms. This tone arm is a unipivot, so it doesn't have the what I call the stop fly problem. You all know that the static friction is higher than dynamic friction. You put your cell phone on your car dashboard, you're turning a corner, nothing happens, then all of a sudden it flies off.
Right.
That's because it stays there until it breaks static friction, then it flies. If your grooves are too wide apart, the bearings of your tone arm, it's got to break the static friction, then it flies, and then your cantilever pulls it back, stops it, and so your tone arm is constantly doing this. So that's why he tries to keep the grooves as smooth and as even and as small as possible.
What you just described, the tone arm,
Yeah.
is that true for linear tracking arms as well?
It's even worse for linear
Worse.
tracking, because linear tracking arms also crab. You've got a point at a distance away from the pivot, and the pivot is here, so it's got a pull, and the arm will bend and constantly do that. So linear tone arms are the worst of the lot. In engineering terms, I know audiophiles love that, but that's stupid. That's audiophile stupid. Because if you understand the physics of all this, the linear tone arm is the worst. Is the worst of the lot.
Unless you have a frictionless bearing.
Unless you have
an air bearing.
frictionless
Air bearing.
a frictionless bearing, but a frictionless bearing like an air bearing.
Well, you have another problem too, which is with the frictionless bearing, then you have no anchor for the other end.
You've
of the
got no
tone arm,
anchor.
So you've got all the resonances.
You've got
of the tone
anchor. You've got no anchor as all the. And the other problem with frictionless bearing is, how do you do your frictionless bearing unless it's a perfectly permeable tube? If it's not a perfectly permeable tube, there are holes,
And everywhere it hits a hole, there's restriction and
Right.
there's resistance. So there's no such thing as a perfect tube.
I'd like to invite anybody at the club to come over to my place anytime. I've got all 3 of these LP copies, plus soon I'll have the production copy. I also have the tape, and I have multiple different arms, both conventional and Claudio's latest linear tracking, and various cartridge profiles. So if you want a lesson in hearing all these things with a slightly better turntable setup, as good as this is,
Yeah, this
We
is
can do
this is
better.
basically an entry level
Yeah.
the system, because we wanted it to be realistic for all of you and also for the rest of the world. So that's a $2,200 turntable with a $750 cartridge and a $1,200 phono stage.
But what's
But
interesting is that all those differences in the vinyl showed up just like
showed
that.
up just like that.
Yeah.
There is enough transparency in this system to do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
It's not a bad system.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a good system. The club is a good system.
So, Joe, are you willing to put together a special deal for somebody who's willing to buy a table and pick up pressing of the vinyl as well?
I can promise a better deal on the table. I don't know about the availability.
I don't know whether
of-
by the time he orders the pressing there'll be any left.
Well, this is kind of a reminder of the competitive aspects of high-end audio LPs. If you've learned anything in these meetings, if you want a copy of this, you better get on top of it right now.
Before he made it.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
should have ordered it before I made it,
Yeah. So,
That's a
You know, I-
lucid disc, right?
What's that? Elusive Disc. Yeah, Elusive Disc is the exclusive US distributor at this point. The way Elusive Disc, Needle Doctor, the Music Direct, Acoustic Sounds, all of those guys work is that they distribute each other's titles. So if Elusive Disc has got any left, or they want to be kind to Music Direct, they'll sell some to Music Direct to sell as a deal. So Elusive Disc is the distributor for the US. And I know some of you bought it after the first time I played the test pressing. And that was the first test pressing where we did the Thorens thing. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a different side, because I want to play you the lacquer. Now this is a direct to disc lacquer. So it's